Finally, after more than 2 decades, the Supra is back. And boy, does the internet have a lot of opinions about this car. Fortunately, Toyota has invited me out here to Virginia to finally drive the new Supra and set the record straight. The first thing you need to know about the new Toyota Supra is that it's surprisingly small. It's actually roughly the same length as the current Toyota 86 sports car, but the wheelbase is actually 4 inches shorter than that car. However, visually, it looks much lower, and that's because although it's about the same length as that vehicle, it's much wider. 2 inches wider track in the front, 3 inches wider track in the back, and it gives it a very aggressive looking shape. That aggressive shape comes from a blend of curves and lines and angles that are all over this car that, again, just don't come through in the pictures versus seeing the car in real life. This thing really does kind of look a lot like the FT1 concept car we saw a few years ago. So I know this car is white and tends to blend in some of the lines a little bit, but seeing this car in person is striking. There's just so much going on from all corners, all these crazy lines, and all this curvature, and all this texture, and all this stuff happening on the car, that until you see it in real life, you just don't understand. Like this big clamshell hood, and the curvature, and the fender panel, and the creases in the door. And look at this standalone extension piece in the door. Sure, the vent's fake, but man, does it look really cool. Then it has this integrated side skirt piece, and then you come to the quarter panel, which picks up here and brings this big swoopy line into the quarter panel, but then it curves up and juts in like this, which gives it really pronounced hips. The trunk lid's the same way. It has like an integrated duckbill spoiler effect where it's dished right here and basically totally flat back here, a lot like the Mark IV Supra was in this panel right here. Of course, the craziness doesn't end there, because if you look down, you see that the taillights have like a 3D effect and shoot out from the car, and that the quarter panel clips in tight here, and there's more fake venery happening here. The whole effect is so Japanese super future. I love the way this car looks in person. Now, while the outside of the Supra is very, very striking, the interior is more typical sports car. Very tight cabin, very driver focused, and a big departure for Supra. This is only a 2-seater, it's not a 2+2. There's no token back seats back here. This is all trunk space. Of course, this particular Supra I'm sitting in right now is one of 1,500 launch edition models. These are only being sold for the first model year and are basically an exclusive trim spec that have this really cool black and red leather interior and some other nice exterior goodies on the outside of this car. Alright, we're looking at the inside of the Supra now, and I love the instrument cluster. It's this full digital display, kind of feels like a fighter jet vibe. Big tachometer right here in the middle, speedometer over here, digital display. Here's all your information you need, like say door ajar right now. Fuel economy there, coolant temp right there. Kind of minimalist, very nice. There's additional stuff that displays over here once you kind of get going in the car, like your odometer, stuff like that. Steering wheel is kind of typical contemporary Toyota, though I like the two-tone black and red you get in this limited edition model. The interior, looking at the dash, very contemporary Toyota with the sort of flat dash with the stacked instrument cluster here. Though if you look at this center console, from here on down, this is all cribbed from BMW. This is straight out of the BMW parts bin. It's all very nice, but it is straight out of a BMW. Though it's worth noting that on this car, this carbon fiber trim is actually real carbon fiber. We asked Toyota and they said so. This isn't plastic, it's real carbon. A very nice little touch. Pretty decent sized trunk space in the Supra since it's only a 2-seater. While the aperture of this opening is pretty small, the overall trunk size is pretty large, though this speaker system right here does take up some of your usable space. Under the hood is a BMW source V58 engine. If you're not a BMW nerd, that means it's a 3-liter Inline-Six engine that is turbocharged. It's paired exclusively to an 8-speed automatic transmission taken from ZF, again from the BMW parts bin. In super spec, it produces 335 horsepower and 365 pound-feet of torque. That peak torque figure is available at 1,500 RPM, and peak horsepower is from 5,000 to 6,500 RPM, and redline is 7,000 RPM. So a lot of people do find this car to be overstyled, and while I'm not one of them, I can admit that for some people this car's me too much. Now, a big thing about this car that people don't seem to like on the internet at least is all the fake vents. I mean, this car's covered in them. In the bumper, the fender, the door, the quarter panel, the list goes on and on. Fortunately, Toyota has those people covered too, because these vents actually pop right out. We've actually been told if you take these vents out, especially the ones in the bumper and the fender, it actually adds a little bit of front downforce to the car, which is a pretty cool feature. They just pop right out. Of course, people also find the front end of this car to be very controversial, very over-styled. And again, while I personally think it looks great, the vents, the ducting, all this mesh seems to be another point of contention. Fortunately, I'm here to tell you something Toyota's told me, which is that this is all functional. This all leads to the front cooling system. And while you see these block-off plates here where you think a fog light should go, these have been left blank intentionally. Now in stock form, this actually helps improve efficiency of the cooling because it basically means air is only going through where Toyota wants it to go through. However, they've left all this area behind these covered panels empty intentionally, and that's because if you want to go to regular track days, you might want to invest in bigger, better cooling solutions for your Supra. So they've left intentionally provisions for an oil cooler or a bigger radiator, or even a bigger intercooler. It's all intentional and done by Toyota. Very cool. It's finally happening. Toyota Supra is back. Now I can hear the JDM fanboys screaming in excitement and joy. So at 335 horsepower and 365 pound-feet of torque, moving a car that weighs, by Toyota's claims, 3,397 pounds. You think, oh, I'm sure it's quick, but it can't be that fast. But no, it's definitely pretty quick. Sorry, my driving impressions are pretty scattered right now. I'm really just taking in the Supra for the first time. Now, to Toyota's credit, they pretty much let us loose in these cars after a driver's meeting and a few lead follow laps. And so I'm really getting to experience a Supra in a pretty unrestrained manner, which props to them for that. Oh, that's off camber. Again, for some reason, this one too is not letting me down in second gear. We're only going 40 miles an hour, but it's not giving me that lower gear for some reason. Now, it's kind of strange. There it goes, took it a second. Because this ZF 8-speed automatic, the one BMW uses in a lot of their products now, is a great transmission, though Supra has Toyota's own calibration on it. And man, it just doesn't seem to have that razor-sharp response I've come to find in modern BMW products. That 8-speed transmission just doesn't seem to have that rapid fire downshift. There it goes. And this is with, you know, the car in everything sporty, everything aggressive mode. So I have to say the 8-speed transmission, a bit of a downer here. I definitely prefer to see a 6-speed manual in a car like Supra. But that's the world we live in these days. It's definitely great on the upshifts. Upshifts are rapid fire, but those downshifts, just not there. Like I hit the paddle going for second, it just takes it a while for some reason. It's just not that sharp. Which is definitely a disappointment. There, it won't give me second gear. Look, it won't give me second. There it goes. Tada-san is here, and he's talking about continually how responsive this car is. It's not about peak horsepower. It's about being a driver's car and being responsive and agile. And in the handling and the calibration, electronic power steering, and the actual pedal response, it's all fabulous. There, actually gave me second this time. Very fun car to drive, very engaging. I really like everything about this experience except for the transmission. The brakes are massive. 13.7-inch rotors in the front, 13-inch rotors in the back, unless you get the premium or the launch edition, which makes them 13.6-inch rear rotors. So no brake fade, chassis balance is excellent, engine's great, razor sharp engine, pulls just off idle all the way to 7,000 RPM red line. Really stable under braking, really good at bouncing over curbing like that. It has a little bit of body roll as you'd expect from a stock car. Very adjustable via throttle or braking mid-corner. Very friendly car to drive overall. Definitely disappointed in that transmission though, have to say that. Okay, I'm on the road in the 2020 Toyota Supra. And I think I need to go over some basics with you. Now, I'm not sure how I've edited this video together in post, but you may have seen my track footage, you may have not. Either you've seen it or it's coming. But I want to focus on the road because while Toyota has put a lot of emphasis on the track capabilities of the Supra, it's ultimately a road-going car. It's on road tires, it has a road-going suspension that's pretty comfortable. And so I think it needs to work out here way more so than it needs to work on the track, though I do love Toyota gave us all that track time to play with. And I think out here on the road, the Supra acquits itself better than it does on the racetrack, which is, again, not surprising for a road car. Now, on the track, my biggest gripe with the Supra is the automatic transmission. Sometimes it just didn't understand what I wanted it to do, which is a bit surprising for the ZF 8-speed. It seems like, for me, it would never downshift in second gear when I requested it until a few seconds after I requested it, which in case it's too late, and that's kind of not super great. But on the road, that doesn't seem to be an issue when you're not charging the car as hard as it'll go. Windows up. The transmission's perfect. Really quick shifting in sport, really smooth in normal regular mode, and the same deal. There, that was a perfect 2-gear downshift when it sensed me getting on the brakes. And again, this is a comfortable road car. Now don't forget, the Supra has always been more on the grand touring spectrum of the sports car world, and so it needs to work well in that avenue. I was actually talking to a guy here who's been invited out because he is a prolific Supra guy. He owns a bunch of Mark IVs, he's been in Mark IIIs and all that stuff. He's kind of been around the Toyota Supra lineups. He kind of understands the heritage of the brand, and he was telling me that his biggest concern about this car is not the out-and-out performance, but for him, it's how well it works as a road car. You can get in and just drive for long distances and go have fun. Look at that. Perfect downshifts on the road. Now, this Supra event is being held in Virginia, way out in the country. Well, technically I'm in West Virginia right now, but kind of right near the border. And the roads here are fun. They're tight and twisty and winding, but they're also very bumpy. I'm not sure if you can see the camera shaking, but I sure can. And the Supra, with its adaptive dampers, standard equipment on this car, is doing an amazing job out here. It somehow has struck that perfect balance, which is a word you'll hear me talk about this car, balance, all the time. Tada-san is here, and it's all he ever talks about is the balance of the car. He doesn't want to give too much of anything. And I would say that they've kind of done it here. I mean, this is a really rough road I'm on, but the car is just soaking up the bumps. I'm pretty comfortable. I feel like I could drive this car for a long time and not be fatigued by it. But at the same time, it does have enough of a sporting edge where I'm not gonna feel like I'm disinterested or dull. I feel connected to the driving experience. And that engine, wow, it's razor sharp. Toyota's been talking nonstop about the response of this car. You know, a turbocharged car has always been a turbo library. Put your foot on the throttle, it takes a second as the exhaust gas turbocharger, and then it goes. But there's minimal perceptible lag on this car. The way you actually drive this car in the real world, you don't really feel any sensation of lag. And according to Toyota, it shows this cool little dyno plot. This car makes peak torque at just 1,500 RPM. And it makes peak horsepower from 5,000 RPM all the way to 6,500 RPM with a soft taper right at the 7,000 RPM red line. So that means basically from 1,500 RPM all the way to the red line, you have great usable power. And even just off idle, it still feels pretty torquey just because you're working with a relatively large 3-liter straight 6. Wow, this road's amazing. A lot of undulations. Woo! Look at that. And the Supra is like a perfect cohort for this. You know, on these sort of winding roads where you're kind of just enjoying the sensation of driving, I think I'd still prefer to have a manual transmission ultimately, but here is where that CF 8-speed really makes sense. The place you're actually going to use it on the road. Flipped it over to manual. Look at that. Razor sharp on the upshift. Hey, that time it gave me second really quickly. Yeah, this is it's just a really good car. Though the sticking point is that for this amount of money, $49,990, little under 50 grand starting, and about 52 grand once you go mid-spec or put any sort of option on it. That's a really competitive market to be in right now. I mean, at this event, people have been constantly talking about, you know, what are you benchmarking this car against? What is your reference? And the responses are so varied between who you ask here. It's kind of astounding. I've seen everything from Cayman S to 370Z, Camaro SS, Mustang GT, even BMW M2 got thrown into the mix. Of course, the Z4 that this car shares its platform with. And so it seems like you have a pretty broad range of cars this thing's competing with. And so it has to wow buyers. It has to really show them, look, you should buy a Supra. And now, I think they've done that to a pretty good extent. Though, like all things, when it comes to opinions and choice, everyone has slightly different prerogatives and slightly different inclinations. But this, to me, is going to sell pretty well. One, Supra name. People see the return of the Supra and want to know what's going on. It's a big deal. It just is. 2, styling. I think they nailed it. Some people have derided the styling as not being close enough to the FT1 concept Toyota showed off over 5 years ago, but I think that's just how cars are. You know, you show a concept, you need to kind of tone it down for production. I think overall, they did a fabulous job with this car. It's one of those things where I don't quite think that pictures do this car justice. Now, I'm not the only person here who's actually said that today. Look at that. That transmission is just amazing on the road. It really does seem like when you see this car in person, you are just so awestruck by the curvature of the body and all the lines, and there's so much going on with the exterior of this car, and I think it's gorgeous in person. It's just such an amazing car to look at, and it doesn't have a bad color, which is interesting. Every single color here, from the matte gray to the red, the white, the black, the blue, the other gray, the whatever you want, they're all really good looking on this car. And that's indicative of a car that has really good styling, and I think they've nailed that sort of thing. So, we've talked about the transmission. I ultimately wish I had a 6-speed, but the ZF8 speed's pretty good on the road. Talked about the styling. I think it's pretty good. And the performance, well, as you have seen or are going to see on the track day drive, it's capable. It's certainly very capable, very nimble, agile car, very tactile, very responsive, very precise. I noticed with this car, it does drive a lot like a bigger, heavier Toyota 86, where it's going to understeer if you cause it to understeer, and it's going to oversteer if you cause it to oversteer. Otherwise, it's a pretty neutral player, which makes for a fun, engaging drive. So I think my only real qualms with this car is that the Z4 exists, because they basically have used a BMW platform and a BMW powertrain and a lot of the BMW electronic stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff here is cribbed straight from BMW, and they don't exactly do a perfect job of hiding it all the time. So if you pop the hood, you see a lot of things that are stamped BMW on them. Kind of a bummer, but I guess it is what it is when you share a platform like that. Now, I want to double back on that engine. People, man, the internet has a lot of opinions about this. People didn't like the styling, they didn't like the fact that it had a manual transmission, they didn't like the price, they didn't like seemingly everything about it, but one sticking point that seemed to be universally disliked was the power figures. 335 horsepower, 365 pound-feet of torque from the turbocharged inline-six cylinder engine under the hood. I think people are forgetting that absolute horsepower figures aren't the end-all, be-all of performance. So to that end, you do kind of look at the other metrics. Now, while this may have less power than like a Camaro SS or a Mustang GT, for example, it's also way lighter than either of those cars. So as a result, 0 to 60 happens in just 4.1 seconds, which is way more than competitive with any of the current cars in segment. And indeed, this feels like basically the perfect amount for a road car. I mean, it never ever feels slow. It always feels pretty quick, pretty agile. Yeah, no one should call this thing slow. Wow, that's pretty quick. Yeah, if you think this car is slow, you just haven't driven it or you're wrong. Sorry, end of story. I mentioned it also sounds really cool because, wow, it sounds really cool. Nice burble and crackle from the exhaust. It has a definitively inline-six cylinder sound. And I think the nice thing about this car is beyond the all-out performance is sort of, again, that sort of road-going presence and enjoyableness to drive. Because while you may be flat out at a drag strip or track day every now and again, for the most part, you're just on the road driving to work. And it's there. This car is just nice to drive. It has great immediate response from the engine, amazing torque, nice down low. It's comfortable. It's surprisingly fuel efficient. I believe it cracked 30 mpg on the freeway, which is commendable in this segment. And if anything, if we've learned anything from this, is that it will likely have the hallmark Toyota reliability that we've kind of come to expect. Which means that you can go out and do this for a long, long time. It's a really good car. Now Toyota, just give us a manual transmission. Thanks for watching. Bye. I didn't like the transmission at first, but now I clearly see that the biggest demerit of this car is that it doesn't come with a bucket seat from the factory, because wow, this thing can really rip, and it'll rip you right out